Right, welcome to part 3 of my Traveling the Web on the WordPress HTTP API workshop. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I do recommend you watch them. I'll add the links to those parts in the description of this video. Just to refresh what we've done so far is we have, not yet, we've built a page. Let me just log into my WordPress TED site. There's the form page. We've built a page on a WordPress site that connects to, that's the wrong page. Let's log in this way. Don't ever use admin for your logins, folks. I only do this because it's local. So we built a page that renders a shortcode. The shortcode connects to the MailChimp API using, that's the shortcode there. So not now. So if we view the page, we will see a list of subscribers coming from the MailChimp account. For the purposes of, I'll do that later. For the purposes of this, let's actually get the account that I was working on the last time, because this code is written with a different account, so I want to get the most recent account. So let's just go and get the API key for this one. Copy it out of there. The code I have updated to match the GitHub repository. We're on step 4 of the workshop code. I just want to get the list quickly. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I did all of this in the first 2 videos. Audience name and defaults, there's the list ID. So I'll just pop that in there. I'll talk about what I'm doing here in a second. But let's make sure we're connecting to the right account. There we go, Jonathan Bossinger, john@domain.com. If we have a look at the contacts for this account, there are the 2 contacts. So those do still tie up. Right, so the code, I have switched to, if you have a look at my branch, I'm on branch 03 of the workshop code. So if you've checked out the code from the GitHub repository and you switch to this branch, then you will see more or less this code, except for the API keys and things will be different. I'm going to delete that account shortly as well, so don't try and use this for spam purposes, but there's no valid emails in there anyway. So what I've got is I've got my subscriber shortcode. This is slightly different from the first 2 videos, but this is more along the lines of the workshop code that I wrote. I'm then getting the subscribers from MailChimp. If there's a failure, I'm echoing that message. Otherwise, I'm getting the subscriber emails and outputting them in a table. Here's when I'm getting the code. I'm setting up some empty response array that if there's an issue, we can give the user some kind of message. Building up the URL based on the API key. Setting up the headers, which we did in the first video. Creating the URL, which we didn't do. We hard-coded it. Making the remote GET request with the URL and the arguments, which will give me some response. I'm checking if this response has an error. If it does have an error, I update the response message with the error. Otherwise, I get the object, which we retrieve the body and decode it. If I'm using the error logging just to output it for logging purposes, I'll remove that if it was on production. If the response object is an error or is empty, then I'll again update the message to return. Otherwise, I am getting the list of subscribers from the member email address. So slightly different to the first 2 videos. I've added some extra checking, I've added some logging, but more or less the same. This debugger.php, if we have a look at that, is effectively the debug code. I've just put it in a separate file. You can take that out, you can leave it in, it's entirely up to you. I just like to use this very simple little debugging function to output debug logs into log files in the plugin. So the next step of this workshop is that we want to now build the form. So we want to build a shortcode which renders a simple subscribe form with an email address field, and then we want to post that email address to the MailChimp list. For building the form, we're going to be using a shortcode. We need an email address field and a submit button. If it's successful in the beginning, we're just going to store it in the options table. And this is the form code that we can use. So I'm just going to copy and paste that right into my clipboard right now. And then these are the WordPress functionality we'll use. We'll be building a shortcode again, and we'll be hooking into the WP action hook and we'll be using that to get the form post, check if it's been posted, and then store the data. So I'm going to cheat a little bit now. I'm going to basically grab the code out of the GitHub repository on step 4, which I've got in another window here, which you can't see. But basically, I'm going to build the form by doing this. So let's pop that code in. No, that's not the code that I want. Let's pop this code in over here. And here we go. So step 4, I'm going to build a form. There's the add shortcode functionality. I'm calling it form shortcode. I'm basically calling the function the same name. And then I'm just going to output the very simple form. So if I take that form shortcode and I pop it into my page, new block there, update, view page. There we go. Simple subscribe form with the email address and a button. This is the theme that's being rendered. So we're getting there. Right. So I've got the form working. I've got the email address set up. You'll see I've got a hidden input in the form called WCEU form. And then I'm just using output buffering to capture this email and return it to the shortcode. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do after I've done this is I want to actually process the form data. So once I've built the form, I'm going to, this is a bit early, I think. No, yeah. Once I've built the form, I'm going to need to say, well, when this form gets posted, first of all, it's getting posted to the same page. I haven't specified an action variable on the form or an action attribute, so it'll just post to this exact URL. So it's going to post back to here. I need to interact with the form post some way. One of the easiest ways to do it is to use a WordPress action. If you Google search, well, if I Google search, it'll come up because I do this a lot. You will see a list of all the available action hooks. And this is the order in which the actions get loaded. Some people prefer to use a knit or however you pronounce it. Some people use the word WP. It doesn't really matter. For the purposes of this one, I'm going to use the WP action hooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again steal some code from my repository. It's just easier to copy and paste it. So below this, I'm going to say, right, let's process the form. So I'm going to add an action, or I'm going to add a hook to the WP action called maybe process form. In that, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to say, right, if the WCEU form hidden input is posted, in other words, it does exist in the post data, then continue to process the form. If it doesn't exist, if it's not set, this form hasn't been posted, so don't do anything else. As I mentioned in the first video, I'm not doing anything with nonces or input validation, so there should be some nonce checking set up in here. If you want to read about that, you can do that in the plugin handbook, but we're not going to worry about that now. So if the form is posted, I'm simply going to update an option called WCEU email with the email address, just to make sure that my form data is posted. So this should now do something. So let's go back and refresh this page. And to check that the data is there, I'm going to open up phpMyAdmin, which I use for local database. I don't often go into the database, but it's just a quick way to see what I'm doing. Where's my WordPress database? There it is. So in my options table, if I search for a WCEU email address, I think I will find one now, because I think I was testing on this database a while back. Okay, there's nothing there. Great. So let's post this form. So my email address is going to be johnboss@gmail.com. Let's see if this submits and gets saved. Okay, so something's happened. I don't quite know what's happened. Let's do a refresh on this. Option name, WCEU email. And there we go. It has saved it. It has saved it as that email address. So I know I am processing the form data. It would be nice to maybe output some kind of message here. So we could do that. We could say something like, we could echo something here, or do something with an admin message or something. But for now, I'm not going to worry about that. I know that I'm processing the form data and I'm saving it into the database. So the next thing that I want to do, and the reason I'm rushing through this is because this is not the point of this workshop. The next thing I want to start doing is I want to start sending this data to MailChimp. So I want to make a remote post. I want to post the data to MailChimp. Why do I want to post the data? Well, if I go to my API playground, and let's grab the API key for this account. If I want to add a member to a list, what do I need to do? So the API playground says to me, right, here are the details. This is the kind of request that I can make. This is the response. But how do I post data? So if I want to post members, for example, and it'll actually show me, this is still get, sorry. I want to create a member. So if I want to create a member here, I can actually say, put in some data, and it'll send information for me. Now, I don't quite know yet what I need to do there. So let's have a look at the documentation. So the documentation, which you probably should read first, but I tend to go into the playground first and then read documentation later. The documentation says that when I'm working with lists, if I want to add a member, I want to create a member, I need to send a post request to the URL endpoint lists, list ID members, which you will notice is exactly the same as the URL we use to get the members. So this is very interesting. So it's just a different type of verb, the header, HTTP header verb, that will be enable me to add a member versus get a member. So let's copy this out, and let's, if you can duplicate from here. I don't know. Never done it. Anyway, let's create a new one. Let's pop in the same URL, but we're going to change it to a post request this time. Okay. We're going to need the same headers for the authorization. So let's pop, no, that's not what I want. Authorization, blast, authorization, I want the same API key stuff, and then I need to send something. What do I need to send? Well, let's just try and send it without any data. See what happens. And you'll see it's saying field email address, this value should not be blank. So it's telling us that an email address field is the only address field we need for a new member. So let's go back and have a look at the documentation. There we go, request body parameters, email address of type string, email address of the subscriber. Current status also seems to be a required field because there's a star next to it. So it seems to be that those two fields are the only fields required. So what does that mean? That means I need to post an email address and a status. Okay, so let's go back to Postman and let's see if that's valid. So let's say under parameters, I want to send an email address. I'm going to say johnboss@gmail.com, and I want to send a status. And what types of statuses do I have? Well, the documentation tells us that possible values can be subscribed, unsubscribed, clean, pending, transactional. So let's make it subscribe just for now. Go back to Postman, subscribe. So that looks right. Okay, I'm posting to the URL, I'm posting the email address and the status, set up the headers. So theoretically this should work. Let's have a look and see if that's true. I send my example request. It says no, email address is not valid. So what has gone wrong there? Why is that not working? Okay, well, let's go back to the documentation. So the documentation says members, request body parameters. Request body parameters. Now, what that doesn't tell you is the fact that, let's go back to the playground. My API key again. Okay, so we go back to lists. That's the list I want to work with. There it is. Okay. I want to members. And I want to create a member. Now you see here it starts with this empty JSON array. Okay. Documentation says request body parameters. Down here, let's go scroll and have a look at the docs. Got some examples here, header, data, data. Okay. I'm just trying to find a note about this because I know how this ends up working, but I can't remember the exact way to do it. Oh yes, here we go. So you'll see how it's in this JSON object. Okay, so what that means is I can't pass email address and status as individual parameters. I need to send it through as a JSON object. Okay. So let's copy that out, go back to Postman, go back here, and we'll just call this key data. And the value, we will put more of a JSON-y object. Okay, we'll take out status, and we'll say the email address is jboss@gmail.com. Status is subscribed. I'm not going to worry about tags now because we don't need them. But that is what I'm sending now. So let's see if that works. Theoretically, this should now work. Let's have a look. Why is that broken? Wonder. Anyway, I can't remember exactly why, but if we have a look at the code and we go to step 6 of my code, I'm trying to remember what this is. Let's have a look here. That should have worked. Why did that not work? For those of you who are more up to speed on this than I am. Oh wait, that's probably why, because it's not in single quotes. Okay, let's try that. I think Postman needs it to be, where's Postman? Come here. Might be wrong. I seem to recall there's a way that this needs to be done as like a JSON object or something. Oh wait, it's in the body. I'm sending it as parameters, it needs to be in the body. That's the problem. Okay, so I think if we go form data, and we say data, and then we put it in there, I think that's what it's got to be. I always forget this part when I'm working with Postman. So let's just go back here. Take out the tags. We don't need the tags. Okay, I think that should work now. I think that should work. Let's try sending. No. Now I'm confused. Did this some time ago when I was building this. Gee, I can find it now. Ha ha ha. No, not that one either. Trying to remember. Is it raw perhaps? If I just put it in raw like that, I think it does work. One of these two, I can never remember. There we go. Okay, so something I don't often do is test that in Postman, and I tend to forget how it works. But there, if I put the raw data in the body of the request, then it's going to create the email address for me. So how do we do that in PHP using the WP remote post? So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cheat outrageously, and I'm going to switch to the branch that already has that code. So I'm just going to check out this thing quickly. Hang on, what is it? Skip branch 04, 06, 06. So let me say git, check out 06 post to MailChimp. And let's have a look at the code that I've done there. So cheating massively, but here we go. Okay, so there's the shortcode, there's the get subscribers, there's the form shortcode, here's the process form. Okay, so check if the form exists. If it does exist, then get the email. Then what I'm doing is I'm building up this subscribe data array with the status as subscribed and the email address as the email. So that array effectively represents this JSON object here in the body. Then what I'm doing is I'm passing that to the subscribe email to MailChimp list function. So what that does, let's see what that does, is it gets the API keys, builds up the parts and stuff, a little bit of duplication going on here, but it's fine. It sets the same headers as I did previously, and then in the body attribute of the arguments, I encode the array that I'm passing through to it. So that will turn this array of data here into this raw JSON body that we're going to pass through to the request. Okay. Then once it does that, it builds the URL in the same way, posts the URL and then the arguments to the URL, and then does the same level of checking and whatnot and updating and all that it needs to do. Okay, so all of that code is like this. The only difference is now I'm passing the data in the body. Okay, so if you have a look at the documentation, and this is always the part where I get confused when I'm working with APIs, is it specifically says to you request body parameters. So these are the parameters you need to pass in the request body as part of a JSON array. Okay, this is specific to the REST API endpoint. Now, typically when you post parameters in a body, you would do them in this kind of format. You'll build up an array, encode that array, and post that into the body element of the arguments for WP remote post. Okay, so let's see if that works. So I'll go back and we'll refresh this. We should now have that John Boss user, J Bossinger, I think it was. Oh, I've switched out API keys again. So let's go back and get my API key again. So let's get the current account that I'm working with. I can't even remember the login for the other one. So let's just update that. So we're working with the same data. And then let's go to the audience, the contacts, audience name and defaults, get the ID. Here we go. Okay, so now that's that one. So let's make sure we're getting the right data. There we go. Okay, so there's the J Bossinger that we added. So let's add another one. Let's go johnboss@gmail.com. This should now post it to MailChimp and retrieve it back from MailChimp on the refresh. And there we go, johnboss@gmail.com. Let's go back to our audience, go back to contacts. There we go, johnboss@gmail.com, jbossinger@gmail.com. We could add first name, last name. We could add tags. We could add all kinds of fun things. And that's that. So the main, the funny thing is the main sort of learning part of this workshop is really to get used to using WP Remote Post and WP Remote Get to send and receive email to and from your APIs. The other part is learning how to set up headers, authorization headers, timeouts, the arguments that you might need to send in the body, or if you need to send them as parameters, whatever the case may be. But this is, all of this code is really just so that you can learn how to do that and how to do, where's the other one? That. Cool. So that's the sort of finality of the workshop. Hopefully, if you either couldn't make it to the workshop or you couldn't do the workshop while you were there, the whole point of the workshop was that I would just simply be explaining and getting everybody to actually physically build things, and then hopefully dealing with problems and helping with problems, and we hopefully would have had that whole body thing happen and we could have figured it out together. Because I never remember all of the stuff. I always have to look back on old code and figure out what I did somewhere else. So hopefully you've been able to follow this. If you didn't, please feel free to comment on either the original post that all these videos are at, or any one of the YouTube videos. Ping me on Slack, get hold of me on Twitter. This is definitely not an example of good code. Well, when I say good code, I mean there's lots of things that could be done better. This is really just trying to keep things simple and sort of self-explanatory. It's one API. It doesn't mean all APIs will work like this. As I was saying when we had the workshop in the real world, different APIs work in different ways, have different forms of authentication. But get used to using, or at least get used to understanding WP Remote Get and WP Remote Post, and how you can use them to send and receive data from your WordPress plugin, from your WordPress theme on the PHP side to and from either your local API or other APIs, because I think it's a very handy thing to know how to use. Okay, thank you very much for your time. If you enjoyed this, let me know. If you didn't enjoy this, let me know. If I saw you in Berlin, it was awesome to meet you. Thanks very much.